Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Now that sounds like a hall of Muslims in here. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyil kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ba'd. For our dear brothers and sisters, on behalf of the brothers and sisters, young people, women and children of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, on behalf of the Council of African American Imams here in New York City, and nationally on behalf of the Muslim Alliance in North America, I want to express our gratitude to the leadership of the Majlis al-Shura and to all of you for having called us together here tonight and to you for having responded. When I received a call from the Majlis al-Shura leadership asking me to speak here tonight, I thought to myself, well, what do I want to say? As a former Amir of the Majlis, what message did I want to bring informed by my experience? And then it occurred to me, Allah has blessed us. When I say us, I mean Muslims in New York City. I mean the Majlis al-Shura, Islamic Leadership Council. Allah has blessed us to grow and progress, but we still have much more to do. How far have we come in the 30 years since the Majlis was born? I don't know if all of us realize how far we have come. I was thinking about my late teacher, Sheikh Allama Tawfiq, rahmatullah alayhi. And once he said to us many years ago that when people walk into a furniture store and they see a podium like this, or they see a table, or they see a piece of furniture, they look at it and they say, oh man, that's nice. I like the way that looks. And it never occurs to them that that desk or that podium or that table used to be a tree growing in a forest. And that someone put in a lot of work, a lot of sweat, in order to transform that tree growing in the forest into a finished piece of furniture. If you look in your program, you'll see that the Majlis al-Shura of New York currently consists of some 90, that's 90, masajid and Muslim organizations. I don't know how many of us realize that 30 years ago, the Majlis al-Shura began with just 6 people. 6 men here in New York City got together and decided that they wanted to study Islam together. Those 6 men included Imam Abdur-Rashid, Brother Shamsi Ali Beg, Imam Siraj Wahaj, Imam Amin Awad, our late brother Sheikh Shamim Siddiqui. And they got together with Sheikh Khalaj in order to study Islam, 6 people. And they would meet every week, and I think Imam Ayub Abdul-Baki came along then also. This is like back in about 1989. They would meet every week to study Islam together. And after they had been meeting for a little while, those 6 people decided that they needed to keep studying and keep talking and keep sharing, but that they needed to do more than that. They realized that they needed to transform their study into work, and they needed to transform their talk into action. And one day, Imam Al-Amin Abdul Latif, who was the Amir of the Majlis al-Shura for many years, one day he was sharing with the other imams and brothers the work that at that point had been going on for 20 years, the work of dawah, of calling to the faith, that had been going on for 15 or 20 years in the prisons of New York City and New York State. Dawah that was being given by the prison committee of the Dar al-Islam movement. Dawah that was being given by African American Muslims in jail who would go in on a voluntary basis, not with a grant, not being funded, but who would go in on a voluntary basis and preach Islam to incarcerated men. And the Imam shared with Imam Siraj and Shamsi Ali Beg and the others. By the way, I mentioned that there were 6 people. Imam Siraj and Imam Al-Amin, African Americans. Imam Amin Awad, Arab. Another one, Pakistani. They were, from the beginning, even though there were only a half a dozen of them, they were ethnically diverse in their competition, in their composition. So Imam Al-Amin shared with the group that one day he was speaking to an African-American Christian pastor who was a leader in the New York Department of Corrections. His name was Reverend Dr. Earl B. Moore, who is since deceased. And Dr. Moore asked Imam Al-Amin, where is the Muslims' council? He said to Imam Al-Amin, I know where the Board of Rabbis is. I know where the Council of Churches is. I know where the Archdiocese is. But where are the Muslims? Do you have a council? At that time, there was no council. There was no Majlis al-Shura at that time. And so that group of a half a dozen people started meeting and planning and trying to come together in order to create a collective leadership body that now, 30 years later, is known as the Majlis Shura of New York and consists of 90 mosques and Muslim organizations. Now, in the few minutes that I have left, I want to say to you that during the past 30 years that there have been certain landmarks, certain benchmarks that have occurred that help encourage an operational unity amongst the Muslims. The first started just a year or two after the Majlis Shura was created. And David Dinkins became the mayor of New York City. At that time, a group of non-imams, businessmen, Abdur-Rashid, Nasruddin, and Albert Shamsuddin, they rented what is now called space in the LaGuardia Marriott. And they invited imams of different backgrounds from all over the city so that those imams could develop a strategy for unified action at City Hall in order to have Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha added to the list of holidays here in New York City, whereupon parking was suspended. All over New York City, whenever there are Eids, everybody's happy, not just the Muslims. Christians are happy, Jews are happy, atheists are happy, because they know the parking has been suspended. And then a few years after that, the joy that we experienced in coming together and going to City Hall and lobbying. This is the first time this had happened in the history of New York City, that Muslims were showing up in large groups at hearings, advocating for measures to help establish credibility for our way of life. Then in the year 1994, right after Mayor Dinkins had been mayor, an African-American Muslim youth whose name was Shuaib Abdul-Latif was killed by NYPD officers. Shuaib, unarmed, black youth living in the black community. And then 5 years after Shuaib was killed, Amadou Diallo was killed, also unarmed, also living in the black community, also killed by NYPD officers. And that started an entry of the Majlis Shura into the activity here in the city around the killing of unarmed civilians. The Justice Committee of the Majlis Shura was born then in the early 1990s. And as someone who was intricately involved in the demonstrations and in the actions, I looked around and I saw something that disturbed me very greatly. And what I saw that disturbed me very greatly was, even though Muslim youth were being killed along with other youth, when I looked around in the streets of New York, I saw very few Muslims of other ethnic groups other than African Americans who were out there in the street, who were involved, who were at City Hall. So in conclusion, I want to say that concrete work and activity is what has brought us together, but we still have much to do. In the early 1990s, when Muslim leaders of every ethnic group from across the city started lobbying in City Hall, Bill de Blasio was a staffer there. He once said to me, "Oh yeah, I remember when the Muslims first started coming through City Hall." And that action and the relationship between the de Blasio administration and the Muslims goes back to the Dinkins administration. A foundation was laid. When the schools were opened up for the Muslim holidays, the foundation for that is the work that was done 2 decades before around the alternate side parking. So when you see, dear brothers and sisters, this beautiful piece of furniture that's called the Majlis Ashura in the 21st century, Dr. Abdul-Hafiz. The Majlis Ashura in the year 2019. Understand that it once was a tree growing in a forest. And it has been years of work that helped bring it to where it is now. But we still have a lot to do. Too many of our young people are not going to the masjids. Too many Muslim women are in shelters throughout the city. And yes, there's Burma, and yes, there's China, and yes, there's Syria, but there's also Darfur, there's also Libya, there's also Brooklyn and the Bronx and California and Florida. And so we ask Almighty God, we ask Almighty Allah to bring our hearts together. I'm so glad to see in the audience some of the African American imams. Well, let me say something to you, and I'm finished. I got this young lady right to my right here. But I have to say this, because I know you all know better than to invite me and think I'm not going to speak reality and speak truth to power. Listen, those of us, I want to say respectfully, relationships with African American imams is not the same as relationships with African American communities. And because you invite me or invite Imam Siraj or Imam Alameen, that doesn't further the relationships between African American or Latino Muslims and those of you who are of other ethnic groups in this city. And in some ways, the community is just as divided now as it was 30 years ago. Not up at the top, but at the bottom, where the grassroots people are. So those of us who are leaders in this city, men and women, part of our responsibility is to heal the disconnectedness. Too many of the Muslim leaders, imams specifically, are too disconnected from the community, the rest of the communities here in New York City. Too many Muslim leaders are disconnected from any issue other than immigration. Time to come out of the silos. Time to learn how to move in the society. And time for us to engage in unity across ethnic lines, across class lines, across neighborhood lines, and work together with each other and work together with people of other faiths to make this a better city for us and our children and our grandchildren, and may Almighty Allah guide us. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Ameen wa alqaykama. Just did that with Joe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.